On this Thursday night, uncertainty in the air. Weather forecasters release their predictions for this year's hurricanes and severe storms.
And we need to have more action on what we call climate change adaptation.
Why the severe weather is proving difficult to predict. Demanding answers. The opposition calls the special rapporteur to testify on foreign interference after David Johnston ruled out a public inquiry. The insatiable appetite for artificial intelligence and a new Canadian investigation into ChatGPT. Plus, standing tall.
I got an accident and had a spinal cord injury.
How electronic brain implants are helping this paraplegic man to walk again.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We're getting our first glimpse of what to expect from this year's hurricane season, and meteorologists warn it's looking unusually unpredictable. The Pacific hurricane season is already hitting hard and fast. This is the view from Guam, the American island southwest of Los Angeles, where Typhoon Mawar dropped more than 600 millimeters of rain, the strongest typhoon to hit that territory in 20 years. Well, today, meteorologists released their predictions for the Atlantic hurricane season, which officially begins in 1 week. And as Eric Sorensen reports, the forecast includes a lot of uncertainty.
If there were any doubts that hurricanes could pack a major punch in waters as far north as Canada, Fiona put those to rest last fall. 8 months later, memories of the swath cut by Fiona through Truro, Nova Scotia are still chilling for Nicole Lennerton.
It's terrifying, the level and intensity that we're getting. You know, hundreds of year-old trees are not supposed to be depleted in a day.
Fiona demonstrated that hurricanes can retain high winds in the North Atlantic, fed by increasingly warm ocean waters. The Canadian Hurricane Centre watches a huge area off Canada's east coast where every year up to 40% of all Atlantic hurricanes come into their watch zone.
Not all of these storms will have an impact on land. However, it gives an indication of the proportion of the storms in the Atlantic that find their way into our response zone.
It's forecast to be a normal hurricane season, but that will mean 12 to 17 named storms. It's expected 5 to 9 of them will be hurricanes, and between 1 and 4 will be major hurricanes, with winds of 180 kilometers an hour or above. The U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says El Niño currents in the Pacific returning this year should tamp down hurricanes, but Atlantic waters warmer than last year will fuel more storms. That makes this year unpredictable.
When we looked at it, we were like, wow, there's a lot of uncertainty this year in the outlook.
Whoa. But what is certain, some storms will be fierce.
These storms are going to continue to develop faster. They are going to be stronger. They will last longer.
NOAA says new modeling coming this summer will improve forecasting further out. Last year, Fiona looked harmless enough at one point, then took aim at Atlantic Canada before leveling a direct hit. It means Canadians must not only be more aware of what's coming with increasing storm surges,
oh my God, we gotta go,
but must do a better job preparing.
It's the coastal communities, the ones that are at biggest risk in these things, and we need to have more action on what we call climate change adaptation, building climate resilient communities.
Nicole Lennerton doesn't need convincing.
I hope that people really recognize the fact that climate change is real and climate crisis.
So what will a normal year look like with climate change? Depends on where you live and where the hurricanes come ashore in 2023. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
The Coast Guard is getting some help from Ottawa in an effort to keep Canada's waterways safe. The federal government announced plans to spend $2.5 billion on dozens of new Coast Guard vessels. The funds, part of Canada's national shipbuilding strategy, will go towards 61 smaller boats and barges that can operate in shallow waters. Joyce Murray, the minister responsible for the Coast Guard, called the investment critical to help modernize the fleet. With Alberta's election just days away, the energy industry is in the spotlight with talk of transformation. Oil and gas made Fort McMurray the richest municipality in Canada for a time. But as the industry looks to reduce emissions, another potential boomtown is emerging. The city of Cold Lake sits about 300 kilometers northeast of Edmonton. That's just below the province's oil sands. As Heather Yourex-West reports, it's a prime location for exponential economic growth.
The winters may be long in Cold Lake, but in the summertime, this northern Alberta community shines.
Got a beautiful beach, and a lot of people come up here to camp and to fish.
Over the next several years, people will also be coming to these streets to fill thousands of new jobs, because this little city is on the brink of a boom. Right now, people come to Cold Lake to work at the Air Force Base or in oil and gas, but the community will also soon be home to one of the largest carbon capture and storage facilities in the world.
Luckily, the geology in our area is going to allow the carbon to be safely stored underground in these big caverns. It's kind of cool.
It's the cornerstone of the Canadian energy sector's plan to get to net zero by 2050. The country's biggest oil producers intend to bring their carbon dioxide emissions 400 kilometers via pipeline from operations north of Fort McMurray down to the area south of Cold Lake.
Should Dad grab you a Spider-Man one?
Corey Harvey, a local pipeline scheduler and electrician, says the Pathways plan gives him hope that the industry that has employed him for his entire career will continue to be around for decades to come.
I would say I'm excited about it. It's kind of a new path for pipelines and industry entirely.
Yeah, this is a big project, $16.5 billion. So we anticipate 25 to 35,000 people required for the construction phase, which will occur over several years, and then several thousand permanent operations jobs at the end.
With a target to begin capturing and storing carbon by 2030, Pathways says it has hundreds of people working to keep the project on track, but it will still need regulatory approval and hopes to secure public funds in the form of tax credits or subsidies before the carbon can start flowing into the ground.
Alberta is the owner and the regulator of the resource and clearly needs to be at the table. And, post-election, I think they'll be able to engage.
Until then, Cold Lake will just have to wait and see if the little beach city will also become Canada's first clean technology boomtown. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Cold Lake, Alberta.
That potential boom brings some big challenges. Tomorrow on Global National, Heather looks at the calls for outside help in the growing northern community. And Global National is hitting the road next week. Donna Friesen will be broadcasting from Edmonton on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And tune in for Decision Alberta coverage as voters cast their ballots in one of the most heated provincial elections in years. The federal government has announced more than $12 million for safety initiatives in Akwesasne, the Indigenous community along the St. Lawrence River, where 8 migrants were found dead earlier this year.
These are monies which will go towards giving local law enforcement the tools that you need to keep the community safe.
Akwesasne is a popular target for human smugglers due to its geography. The Mohawk Territory straddles the borders between Quebec, Ontario, and New York State. In late March, the bodies of 8 migrants from Romania and India were pulled from the river following what police called a failed attempt to cross illegally into the U.S. The federal government says more than $10 million will go to the Akwesasne Mohawk Police Service to help fight organized crime and spur cooperation with other national and international law enforcement agencies. The other funds are earmarked for local community groups. Former Governor General and Special Rapporteur David Johnston will testify before a parliamentary committee to explain why he ruled out holding a public inquiry into allegations of foreign election interference. In a 55-page report released this week, Johnston concluded that a public inquiry would effectively be pointless because much of the classified evidence involved can't be made public. But as Touria Izri reports, a chorus of Canadians are rejecting Johnston's decision.
Special Rapporteur and former Governor General David Johnston hoped his recommendation would be enough. For opposition MPs, it's not.
All of the opposition parties have agreed that we need to hear from Mr. Johnston.
Johnston is slated to appear before a parliamentary committee in less than 2 weeks and face questioning after ruling out a public inquiry on foreign election interference.
There was not really any significant mention of the gaps in legislation.
Having read the Right Honourable David Johnston's report, which I think is very measured, impartial, has done a thorough analysis.
Partisan kind of bickering And to me, that's a lot of noise.
Chinese Canadians have warned the federal government for years about the threat, and some are disappointed by the decision.
Simply sweeping everything under the rug and saying there will be no public inquiry, I feel that we are once again abandoned.
Johnston calls foreign interference a substantial danger to Canadian democracy, but says a public inquiry would not provide Canadians with the answers they seek.
A public review of classified intelligence simply cannot be done.
There have been public inquiries before where much of the evidence was top secret, like one looking into the detention of Canadian Maher Arar, sent by the U.S. to a Syrian prison on faulty information. Paul Cavalluzzo was the lead counsel for that inquiry and believes Johnston missed the mark.
This is a situation where people have lost faith or confidence in how the government has acted. And as a result of that, a way to deal with it, and a very effective way to deal with that, is an independent public inquiry.
Ultimately, the decision on whether to hold a public inquiry rests with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and he has repeatedly said he will abide by Johnston's recommendation. Touria Izri, Global News, Ottawa.
The founder of the far-right group Oath Keepers was sentenced today to 18 years in prison for his role in plotting and orchestrating the January 6th riot on the U.S. Capitol. Stuart Rhodes, a former Army paratrooper and lawyer, was found guilty of seditious conspiracy, obstruction of an official proceeding, and tampering with documents. It's the longest sentence handed down to the 1,000-plus people charged in relation to the 2021 attack that saw Donald Trump's supporters attempt to block Congress from certifying Joe Biden's 2020 election victory. It can write essays and drive cars. Now, artificial intelligence is aiding in the war against superbugs. Find out how coming up. Plus, what the surging demand for AI means for stock markets. And it's game over for Canada's most successful Jeopardy champion. Scientists in Canada and the U.S. have made a promising new discovery using artificial intelligence. The researchers from Ontario and Massachusetts used an AI algorithm to find a potentially potent antibiotic that could kill a superbug. It needs further testing, but scientists say the antibiotic could have the power to fight one of the world's most dangerous antibiotic-resistant bacteria. It can cause pneumonia and meningitis, and it's usually found in hospitals where it can survive on surfaces for a long period of time. The process could also speed the discovery of other antibiotics. And the demand for AI is driving chip giant Nvidia towards $1 trillion valuation. Shares for the company soared again today. Since January, they've been on a rapid ascent, surging 85% this year. A huge sales outlook is fueling demand for the processors, which run AI systems. And as Mike Drolet reports, Nvidia is closing in on an elite club that includes Apple, Microsoft, and Alphabet.
Is there no end to what artificial intelligence can accomplish? RizGPT could listen to a conversation.
What are your weaknesses?
My greatest weakness is that I can get too focused.
And feed you a response. Call it charisma on demand. The engine fueling the AI boom was only unveiled in November, yet every major company is integrating ChatGPT in its platforms.
ChatGPT is the most sort of fast-growing consumer app we've ever seen.
Nvidia, known for decades to gamers for their video graphics chips, also makes the microchips AI is run on, and saw its stock soar Thursday, pushing it onto the list of top 10 most valuable companies in the world.
This is one of the most historical guidance raises of any large cap tech company in the last 30 years. It's a jaw-dropper, historical, as Nvidia is really seeing this AI gold rush play out in real time. It's a historical earnings for Nvidia as well as the tech space.
As the leading AI chip manufacturer, analysts predict Nvidia's valuation to grow more, way more, with projections that they could overtake Amazon as the fourth most valuable company in the world. But not everyone is happy with the rate with which AI is growing. Earlier this month, the Toronto-based godfather of AI, Geoffrey Hinton, issued a warning, suggesting AI outperforming humans posed an imminent existential threat. And privacy authorities in Canada are now investigating OpenAI, which makes ChatGPT, for disclosing the personal information of users.
I am a visionary.
While Nvidia is cashing in, some see the risk for investors increasing as the market gets crowded with more AI options.
Technology entrepreneurs and investors that are really sort of trying to chase these companies too fast, right? They're not necessarily doing their due diligence on them. They're not necessarily vetting the core team. And so I do think that there is a lot of hype and a lot of, potential for failure.
Hasta la vista, baby. And there's no AI solution for that yet. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Buyer's remorse still ahead. Why some young Canadians are regretting their real estate investments. Canadian millennials who invested in the real estate market when interest rates were low are starting to reconsider their purchases. As inflation rises along with interest rates, some landlords are now thinking about offloading their investment properties altogether. Anne Gaviola explains.
Young landlords have benefited from red-hot rental markets across the country and until the last year, low costs on mortgages. But now many are struggling to cover higher borrowing costs and are rethinking their investment.
People get into the sector, decide they don't like being landlords, and they get out. Or they overestimate the return they're going to make on the property or underestimate the expenses.
More than 1 in 10, or about 4.4 million, currently own an investment property, according to an online poll. A third own 2 or more properties, and multiple property owners are more likely to be aged 34 and under than older than 35.
The stock market has been a tough place, a lot of negative returns, and so people are looking at the real estate market and saying, that might be a better place for my investment.
But more than 30% of investment property owners are considering selling because of higher lending rates, especially in Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. New data from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation shows residential mortgage debt hit a record $2.08 trillion in January. That is up 6% in a year. And there's news this week that Canadian household debt has eclipsed GDP and is the highest among G7 countries. Along with this, an uptick in mortgages in arrears.
That does remain a potential vulnerability for our financial system. In our report, we're already seeing some early signs that some mortgage consumers may be under financial strain.
Those looking to unload an investment property need to consider the business case, understand all costs and fees for changing course.
They're going to have to pay capital gains on any appreciation they've earned for the last few years or from the time they started renting it out as an investment property. That will also impact their bottom line.
A wave of investors getting out of the housing market at once can amplify trends, stoking a hot housing market and potentially creating a steeper price plunge as activity cools. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Digital brain bridge. Next, the technology helping a man overcome his paralysis.
When we add the $24,800 they earned in the first half, it's not quite enough. That brings them to $41,685.
Canadian quiz whiz Matea Roach couldn't quite clinch the Jeopardy Masters title, but still managed to cash in big, earning $250,000. That's a little over 340,000 Canadian. Sadly, Roach's father died during the taping of that tournament. Roach said he instilled a love of learning and was a big part of why they competed on the show. Roach is the most successful Canadian competitor in Jeopardy history. A 40-year-old Dutch quadriplegic who was told he would never walk again is doing just that. Walking, standing, even climbing stairs, thanks to a new medical device. The technology combines implants with a wearable hardware system. Now, so far, he's the only person to try the device. But as Crystal Gamansing reports, with his positive results, his medical team is hoping more people can regain some control and mobility.
Hertan Ozcam has an incomplete spinal cord injury, yet he's walking under his own power, aided by a mostly internal medical device.
When there is a spinal cord injury, this communication is interrupted.
Our idea was to re-establish this communication with a digital bridge.
Neurosurgeons implanted 2 disc-shaped electrodes in his brain. A second surgery was then performed where he was fitted with an electrode on his spinal cord at the location responsible for leg movements. When he thinks about walking, the electrodes in his head pick up that signal, sending it to an external device in a backpack that he wears. That hardware decodes the information, skipping over the injured spinal cord, and sends it to the implanted signal pulse generator, triggering his leg muscles.
The patient has first to learn how to work with his brain signals, and we also have to learn how to correlate this brain signal to the spinal cord stimulation. But this is pretty short.
Over the course of 40 training sessions, Oxam was able to stand, walk, even climb some stairs.
Within 5 to 10 minutes, I could control my hips, like they were like the brain implant picked up what I was doing with my hips, so that was like the best outcome, I think, for everyone.
The medical team's findings have been published in the journal Nature, and they see huge potential for the device.
Not only it could leverage the digital bridge in order to control his paralyzed muscle, but also show a recovery of neurological function he has lost for many years, suggesting that this digital bridge also promotes the growth of new nerve connections.
While there is reason for optimism, more trials are needed to see if the results can be replicated in other people and if the digital bridge can work for people with injuries to other areas of the spinal cord. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
And that is Global National for this Thursday night. I'm Jeff Semple. Tonight's Your Canada is White Shell Provincial Park. That's about 120 kilometers east of Winnipeg. We love seeing Your Canada, so please email your pictures to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Farah Nasser will be at the anchor desk with you tomorrow. Have a great night.